Hey guys, what's going on? This is Dr. Matt Wenning at winningstrength.com. And today we're going to talk about top limiting factors in strength. Now, before we get to this video, please like, subscribe, and comment and tell me what you think before watching the video, what your top factors are in limiting the strength production of any one person. But I can tell you that there are lots of factors that we can't go over today, but there's some main ones that I want to cover that I think may show you why some people are super strong, some people get super strong super fast, and other people really struggle to put on muscle size and muscle strength. The first thing that I think we have to understand is trainability. And trainability has multiple facets of capacity when you're talking about training. Most of the time, trainability depends on genetic factors and pre-training ability. So what does this mean? This means that how good are you before you actually even train? You know, it's funny when you listen to a lot of top level bodybuilders like, I know I've been busting balls on John Brown in recent weeks just based on his lack of education in deadlifting and performance variables with multiple sports. But he talks about being ripped at like 13 and 14 years old, and all of his friends wanted to see his muscles, and he already had a genetic factor involved in his bodybuilding career. Obviously, this is super important since he could get leaned out and win Mr. America contests or Mr. Universe contests eating hot dogs and candy. So obviously, we're not all going to have those level of genetics, unfortunately. But I think this starts to give us an idea that some people are just built to lift. Another one that pops to mind is Flex Wheeler. Flex Wheeler is a friend of mine, and we sat down and had a very good and long podcast on the Winning Strength YouTube channel, if you want to go back and look at it, around 2018, where we talked about how he got introduced to weights because one of his friend's dads had a weight room built in his garage. And they decided that they wanted to be the jack guys at the mall, right? And they wanted to be able to pick up the girls by having muscles. And so him and 3 or 4 of his friends start lifting weights, and then they find out that after a summertime, Flex Wheeler had put on like 3 inches on his arms, and everybody else maybe gained just a little bit. And that's when he knew his genetics were completely different. This is at 13 or 14 years old. So obviously genetics play a key role in a lot of the factors that people, I want to look like Arnold Schwarzenegger, or I want to look like one of the top Chinese Olympic weightlifters. In all reality, although those people do train really hard, their body's ability to accept the training is very, very good. Now, how do we know that our genetics are good for that? Well, sitting around doing nothing, we don't. So a lot of times people that blame their capacity on genetics are oftentimes, on the other end of the token, very lazy and don't even know what their genetics are. I feel that you probably don't even have an understanding of how well your body can adapt to training until about year 3 to year 4 with no breaks. That's especially true in powerlifting. I strongly believe that most people can be very strong and pretty good at powerlifting. I don't have the same thought process with bodybuilding. I think that bodybuilding is one of those factors that is mostly genetic, and drugs do play a part in how good you can get. But you have to be able to accept the drugs in muscle hypertrophy for them to even work, meaning that if you don't have enough receptors for the extra drugs, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to put on any muscle. But we don't need to go too far into that. I think it's just giving you an idea of what trainability is. So one of the factors, especially in powerlifting, is pre-training strength, or pre-fitness. If you're looking at anything, there's certain people, one of the guys, and I don't remember his name right off the rip, that had the all-time ultra marathon record, just decided to run at like 30 years old and figured out he could run like 25, 30 miles straight without really any training. I mean, this is totally insane, right? Like most of us would die out in less than a mile. So pre-training strength is huge, especially when we're talking powerlifting. If we look at somebody like Maddox, Maddox right now has the all-time world record in the bench press at slightly under 800 pounds. But sitting with him and doing another, obviously, podcast with him, a couple of years ago, I found out that when he first touched a bench press, he was able to bench press 500 pounds. So in reality, not taking anything away from anybody's work ethic, my point being is if you already start raw with a 500-pound bench, then it is highly possible you could get into the sevens, and maybe, hopefully one day, Maddox will break into the 800 range. But the point is, if you're starting with a 95-pound bench and it's a struggle, the chances of you getting to a 500-pound bench are either one, impossible, or two, they're going to take so long that you'll quit before you reach that. So I think what we find is that the people that we idolize and that we respect, they are ones that tend to already have natural ability. Again, people like Bo Jackson that were able to jump over a 10-foot creek bed at like 12 years old, and it just freaked everybody out without any training, right? So turns out to be one of the best athletes that we've ever seen. The other factor that I think we don't put into account, especially today in powerlifting, is leverages or biomechanical efficiency. If we look at a lot of the top deadlifters today and we look at their arm length, torso length, etc., what we start to realize is that these people are perfectly built to lift these weights. Most of the deadlifts that I have seen that have been over 900 pounds in the last 5 to 7 years tend to be people that are perfectly built for it. Guys that come to mind are John Hack, at 5'8", and I think I'd probably be a little giving on that because we know how Arnold was stated that he was 6'2". Well, I can tell you that I'm 6'1", and even 25 years ago, I was still looking down at Arnold. So I think that Arnold probably in his prime was about 5'10". But without getting into anything too crazy, they got John Hack listed at 5'8" or 5'9". Well, that's a 5'8" at 220 is a pretty big dude. And I think it's difficult for us to realize that on videos and things like social media, that we don't realize how well built some of these people are to do these lifts. Being biomechanically efficient allows sometimes training like multiple sessions of deadlifting in a week or straining a little bit too hard. It's actually less of a maximum on the body's ligaments, tendons, passive tissue, and muscles if your leverages are better. So we have to be really careful in saying, well, I'm going to use a John Hack training cycle, or even a better example would be I'm going to use an Ed Cohen deadlift routine. Ed Cohen is like 5'5" and 230 pounds in his prime, and that's why he was able to deadlift 901 at 220. Which stood as a record for so many years and still considered one of the best lifters in the world. But I can tell you this, that his height and his stature allotted him a lot of progression a lot faster than most people. By the time he was 18 or 19, he was already doing world record numbers, and a lot of that was due to his biomechanical efficiency. Now, Ed and I are really good friends, and I don't take anything away from his work ethic and how hard he had to train, but the leverages allowed him to train that hard. So again, if you're 6'2" and 165, you're going to have a really hard time deadlifting 900 pounds just based on the fact that you don't have the leverages. Factor 3, biologically active unbound testosterone may also be a factor, and this was proven by Hakkinen in 1985. So we know that the general rule of thumb for the medical community is testosterone can be anywhere around 200 to 250 on the low end, all the way up close to 1,000 or in the mid 900s on the high end naturally. Well, which one would you rather be? Well, I can tell you, you'd rather be on the high end if you're trying to be a good athlete. Higher testosterone levels, especially unbound, are a way for the body to be hyper anabolic and the ability for it to adapt to training much, much faster. So having resting amounts of unbound testosterone is a huge factor in how sensitive you're going to be to your training. You find that bodybuilders, even in the natural ranks, will probably tend to have a higher testosterone level. For me, I was on the opposite end of the spectrum. When I finally went in and had a testosterone test done in 2003, I was already a collegiate national champion with an 826 squat, a 570 bench, and a 700 deadlift. And my testosterone level was 316, super low. And as that happened, I switched over to the pro ranks and had a doctor that put me at optimal level, and I was floating around 935. My squat 2 years later was right around 1,000. Then 2 years later was right around 1,200. The point is that it would have been a lot easier for me if my natural testosterone level would have been in the 900s. And this is what you find with a lot of people that are Olympic athletes, etc. They tend to have all of these factors in a very good row of an ability for the training to actually soak in and absorb. The last factor that I want to get into that a lot of people don't really recognize, but is absolutely true, is pain and fear of pain. So, and again, there's more factors than this, but I think this is a good length video for you to start to understand maybe some limitations or some cop-outs that you might be dealing with in your training. Something when I talk about pain or fear of pain, I've seen this a lot. So like in the amateur and beginner ranks, you can already see the people that can turn that off or that limit or regulate their ability to get better. A lot of people, when something gets difficult or hard, they tend to start changing their technique. They tend to start having almost blackout moments where they just basically go into fight or flight and it works against their lifting. On the other end of the spectrum, when you find high-level athletes, one that comes to mind is Chuck Vogelpohl, had no fear of injury. He would crawl under weights, and he would do things that seemed unimaginable at that body weight, namely being the first person to squat 1,000 pounds at 220, which is totally insane, and being able to squat 1170 at 275, which again was another all-time world record. But every time I ever trained with him, or every time we ever went to a contest, I never saw him have any fear of how anything felt. He never came up to you and goes, God damn, all this feels heavy today. He never did that. In training, he never showed you that he was sore or tired or fatigued. He turned into a fucking monster once the bar got on his back. And so his pain and fear of pain were non-existent. And that was something that I even had to learn in my late teens and 20s training with him. This is what it was going to have to take for me to get to world records. So I think we all have certain apprehension built into our system, and some people just learn how to turn that off, or they just don't have it at all. So I hope this video has educated you a little bit on some top factors that limit your strength production. Some of these, as we know, we can fix. We can go and take more testosterone. Not that I would say that that's warranted unless you're prescribed by a doctor. We can also train harder and get more comfortable with being uncomfortable. That's some things we can change. Having a bench press of 500 pounds or being built like John Hack or Ed Cohen is some things that we cannot change. We are just born with our structural capacity, and we have to work in those ranges. The most important thing we need to realize in training is, guys, don't develop injuries while you're training because you're pushing too hard too fast. I can tell you this from personal experience in coaching a lot of world record holders and a lot of people is once you have an injury, not only does it set you back, oftentimes that joint is never quite the same as it was before you were injured. And at the end of the day, most of us are going to be training very hard and competitively from anywhere from 1 to 3 years, and then life is going to get in the way. This means that if we use an unstructured training process, we use high mileage exercises, and we use a lot of other factors like higher testosterone levels that are beyond safe limits, the repercussions of that are going to be very high. Now ask yourself, is it worth it when you're 45 and you can't walk or you're on a lot of medications because you fried a lot of shit? And the answer is no. So again, it's not a cop-out, but some people have the genetics to break world records and some people just don't. But on the other end, some people have the work ethic to get better, and some people don't, even though they have the leverages. I've seen all of those factors and all the ones in between. So if you need help with training, come on to wenningstrength.com, hop on to online coaching. At the bare minimum, grab a manual and at least learn how to train with some smarts and some science and some application over the last 35 years of training and studying. Talk to you guys later.